Today, we are interviewing Niels Holck. He is a Proutist. We're very excited to have him here, talk to us about a couple projects. So thank you for joining us today. And
you're very welcome.
Yeah, and we'll start with like a pretty introductory, broad question. How did you get involved in Prout, and what's your history with Prout?
16 years old, we were 14 friends that moved into the Prout global office where Prout had just moved out. It was a big villa in the town where I come from, Rungsted, which is like a posh suburb to Copenhagen. So we entered the building and felt strong vibes. We thought they smoked a lot of dope in there since it was so, but yeah. And then I was very politically active, you know, in all kinds of ways, and distraught with the Vietnam War. And, you know, this is 81, and a different world. So for the first time in my life, I heard a consistent answer to the world's problems. And I basically haven't looked back since.
How has your involvement with that affected your life and what you work on?
Everything. Yeah, everything, as I'm sure we will get to talk about. But yeah, for the first 20 years, I was a full-time global worker for Prout. And since then, coming back to Denmark, I have worked to realize the ideas that I had learned out in the world, and found that Denmark is a good place to do this, and that in the long time since the early 80s, things have shifted a lot here too. You know, I became a vegetarian before people heard of it, and now, you know, everybody is becoming vegetarian. I talked about, you know, a lot of the things that we talked about then was really off target in most people's minds, and today they seem self-evident. So it has been a very, very, very fulfilling journey, but a very hard journey also. You know, it's in a transition time is a scope for great personal development or great personal sorrow. And I hope to say that I have developed in this period.
Speaking of transition times, your project Green Island seems to be doing a lot of help with transitioning to greener power options. Could you briefly go over what that's about, or at length if you want to explain a little more in depth about that project?
You know, when you have to reconstruct the basic way we are in the world, and as things have been deconstructed in my lifetime, the right place to start is what we in Prout call the master unit, the community level, because we have to rebuild the circularity of resources, nutrients, power, everything bottom up. And it just, like, you know, all utilities, power, sewage, heating, cooling, all these kind of things that needs to be owned by the community for the service of the community, seems like a good place to start the empowerment journey. And like mobile phones have taken Africa, India, many places, have jumped the whole copper wiring thing and gone directly to mobile. In the same way, it is our ambition in Green Island to take the global south directly to fossil freedom, and thereby actually get ahead, because in our countries in the West, we have a lot of investments, sunk cost in fossil driven systems that we have to get rid of, and that makes transition more difficult. So it seemed like to me that if I could make available the fantastic technological advancement that has happened in the last 30-40 years, make that available as, you know, on a platform digitally for disadvantaged communities to make available for them, and finance it for them on loan, so that they could actually build and own and run these utilities. That would be the, you know, infrastructure is the basis for sound development. and locally owned fossil-free infrastructure is the right way to do it. If infrastructure becomes a center of investments and profits, it actually, all evidence is that it slows down development, real economic development. So utilities for the people is really a very, very strong first step in this empowerment journey that all communities in the world have to take. So that is the idea that Green Island was founded on.
So with this project, are you providing resources? Are you going and actually helping people build things? Is it about getting people to set up their own power sources? Like, what are you actually doing when you get involved with these communities?
As short that I could explain the intent, as long I have to make the answer on that one, because there are basically several issues that needs to come in place for this to be possible for communities in Haiti or anywhere in the world. And the first thing is, of course, to make available the technological understanding and operating systems to run these things. Then you have to buy the hardware, and that these disadvantaged communities, they need to borrow some money to buy the hardware. So how do you secure the investments? There's a lot of green money out there that wants to invest in green utilities, but at the moment they're investing in extractive green energy projects like big windmills that are just earning money for their investors. So one of the big things that we are still working hard on in Green Island is to structure the loans that these communities have to take. And to structure them, you need to secure their repayment. There's a lot of money being poured in from green pension money, and a lot of investments are being made in Denmark in green energy. But we'd like to twist it a little bit and turn it into something that the communities can make available, can take advantage of. So basically, Green Island have to know the technologies, which we are cooperating with technology providers in Denmark, that can provide the hardware, and then we have to build the operating systems, which we are way into doing, and then we have to build the community, what should I say, tools that the communities will need in order to pay for their utilities, in order to run them, and all these things. So it is a big project, and I'm very happy with just before this call in the car, I was called up by my partner, who says that one of the things that we did was we made a vision in a big housing development north of Copenhagen, where I have personally worked for 4.5 years to build a vision of how you build a city that is completely fossil free and cheap to live in. And we have just today sold that vision to the biggest IKEA's bank. It's called Ikano. They want to build green, and they have just bought the possibilities for them to build the houses there today. So that gives us capital based on our ideas, and this is really exciting.
So Niels, what is your role and expertise in this project?
My focus, of course, is the community development and how you engage communities, how you make sure that they have the capacities necessary to actually become a customer. How do we talk to them, with which tonality we talk with them, and what are the structures, the ownership structures, what are the values that we need to embody, not greenwash talk about, but actually do in order to meet the communities. So that has been my main role, but as I am the founding partner together with one more, it has been a little of everything, really, and still is. But my focus, of course, is the values. And at one point, my partner, who is he has been in the capitalist world for his whole life. So at one point, he got really frustrated. He said, "Why don't you want to concentrate on this? We could make $10 million in a very short time, and you're concentrating on the community development. Why?" It makes no sense. But, earning the money has never really given me any satisfaction but of course, earning money makes it possible to do what we do.
I wonder how you've bridged that gap with your partner who's focused on making money. Is Is Green Island a nonprofit, or how does it operate?
Actually, this summer, we had to make some structural changes because it became increasingly hard to bridge that. I want to be honest. And so what we did was that being a project, we decided to sell it. And then we have another operation that is profitable, setting up batteries that are doing service, balancing the grid. So those two businesses is what Thomas, my partner, is concentrating on. And then I have taken over the IP of the rest of the whole platform and everything like that. So we made that split actually this summer.
Oh,
And now I'm free to make this a true Prout partnership, which is what I'm doing, inviting some of the many proudest collaborators that I have around the world and who have been involved in the Green Island project to become partners. And the core group here in Denmark, also all of them becoming partners. So we're turning it into a true cooperative now. We are past that initial state where we had to earn the money to be able to do it. So this has been for me, very, very nice turn of events.
That's really good to hear.
So Green Island will, of course, be a nonprofit. All of us sign wealth cap commitments. And the whole idea is that the partners will own it for now, and as soon as we start helping communities, those communities will automatically become owners of Green Island, so the platform will be owned by the participating communities.
We gotta watch your presentation that you gave on Green Island a little while ago, and I noticed it's much more cost effective. You were talking about in that, like, once you get the initial investment costs set up, this will be actually much cheaper for consumers, right?
Much cheaper. For so many years, we've heard that going green is going to cost, and all the politicians are sort of bidding in with how much money they want to spend on the green transition. It's bullshit. The wind is for free, the sun is for free. Of course, there's an investment. And if you can get that investment as loan capital, then you can repay the investment within 5-10 years. And already in that period, it'll be cheaper than fossil driven. But after you've repaid the hardware, it will be somewhere between a 10th or a 5th of what we're paying for utilities today. So it's a circular city. Just to give an example, to circularize the nutrients within the community, where you take out the methane gas and use it for energy, where you recircle the nutrients back in the soil. You basically have free sewage treatment, because your sewage treatment is creating so much value that you can always get money for your sewage. Down the line, it will be like that. We will see that everything has value, even shit.
Well, in fact, that seems to be a problem of getting capitalists invested in these projects, because it's not they can't control the scarcity of it, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. And we're getting that. I mean, the resistance that we get from like municipalities that have interest in fossil driven solutions, I know it's a mountain to climb, but I mean, how long is that mountain going to be there? One of the things that on that session where I talked about Green Island, there was a discussion afterwards, and somebody mentioned the idea of making like a handbook for families to join together to make their own communities, and simply make it easier for people to take charge and build their own communities in a collective way with collective ownership. And I think the time is right to go that way, because it's what's needed.
I was just gonna ask, in that presentation, you said that Denmark, and correct me if I got this wrong, you said that Denmark is completely consumer owned in their utilities?
Not completely. I think
Okay.
on district heating, for example, which is a big thing here because it gets really cold, it's like 85% prosumer ownership. Power distribution is maybe 60-70%. So yeah, and this is actually a long Danish history, going back to the late 1800s, where utilities were all made on this not-for-profit model where the consumers own. I mean, the waterworks where I live is owned by us. and it's run professionally, and when they do it cheaper, the water gets cheaper.
So can you explain a little bit about what that model looks like, and
Mhm.
also why you think the conditions in Denmark were such that they were consumer owned from the beginning?
Yeah, there's a cultural thing there, and then there's a structural thing in your question. And the cultural thing is Denmark went to war for last time in 1864 and lost to the Germans, and from being a big nation became a bioregion, a perfect bioregion as it is described, and became very much a tribe and have a long history all the way back to the old Norse traditions of village councils and village council going together to the next level. So we have a pre-Christian history of a very democratic way of making decisions, and a big respect among because you never more than 2 or 3, whenever 2 Danes meet, it takes them no more than 3 minutes to figure out a person they both know. so, so that's the cultural aspect. And economically, it just makes so much more sense because like for example, district heating or water, then people pitched in with a small investment, they built it together and they owned it together, and it was really cheap, so nobody could compete with it. So it just stayed that way. And then, of course, Denmark, besides that, have a long tradition of cooperative dairies. The whole economic development of Denmark from the late 1800s till after Second World War, where the Marshall Help was really a destructive force. Part of the Marshall Help was to dismantle the cooperative sector in Denmark, so that we could buy more expensive consumer goods. But in that 80 years, from late 1800s till after Second World War, Denmark had consistently economic growth, had increasing biodiversity, had extreme increase in social equality. So it's not a sort of a distant ideological thought. This is something that was actually done.
And so what does that look like for you as a consumer? Are you paying a bill each month?
Yeah, quarterly or monthly, whatever. Yeah, and that bill is cheaper than if I had to pay to a distant ownership utility. Yeah, average Danish person spent 12 minutes a year looking at their utility bills because they just consider it something that is taken care of.
How do you think it would work for people in places like the US, where there's such a different kind of cultural mindset to try and get involved in a project like this? Do you think it could, if it was like on a community level, could have the same level of effectiveness, or do you think it might be a while to get something like that set up and working, since you have to do all the groundwork of kind of shifting mindsets and everything too?
I think the crisis that we're experiencing now and the responses that are coming to both the climate crisis, but also the inequality crisis, if I may call it that. Like if you look at California, which is close to you, the forest fires coming from the overload of the electrical system has had the response that rich people are buying big batteries and own generators. But many communities are suffering because of that, and there is no real, the cost of expanding the electrical grid is so big that they cannot find the money for it. So the natural response to that is that community join together, and that the communities actually can create the resilience and the backup systems at a much cheaper rate than each household solving it. So really there's we have taken things in a more and more centralized, bigger scale. And then the response for some is, because they can afford it, is to take it down to family scale. But the right scale for like sewage, power balancing, heating, cooling is, in most technical solutions that are green, the community. So it's really it's going to be an economic imperative that we do this, because there is no centralized response, and the response one household at a time is simply too costly. So there is some basic, the green transition is going to drive a restructuring of the way that we live in the world. there's, it's very interesting when you dimension these systems. The more systems with the more different kind of power generation, or the more systems you integrate in a holistic system, the cheaper it becomes for each individual component. So it's really a change of mind that is the response that is happening. The whole response to all the craziness that we see is really a change of mind, and that change of mind feeds into the green way of thinking, and it will be driven by necessity, and it will be driven by simple economics as well, because it's just going to be more and more expensive to continue doing it the wrong way. But I agree with you. Culturally, I worked in the States, in Northwest in the mid 80s, and I do appreciate that there is a cultural challenge. But on the other hand, I visited many communities traveling around the US that are very close knit and have a very strong love of place, sense of self-identification in response to this centralization and crazy politics. This might be more religious type communities, it might be local communities, it might be people have moved to the mountains in Montana or whatever. I've seen so many different kinds of communities. So I think, maybe that's where you need to start.
And if people in communities in like other places, I know you were working with a project in Ottawa, Canada, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you're working with places around the country, like, or around the world, I mean, and if people want to get involved, are you providing kind of like, here's how we did it here, or are you like actively kind of working alongside other places? Like if a community saw this and wanted to try and implement these kind of strategies, would it be better for them to like try and build up their own system, or contact Green Island and try and work with like what you've already established? Because I know you have certain kinds of software and stuff that make planning this and getting it implemented easier, right?
I think it is not either or, it's both. The community, of course, needs to have the human capacities and the mindset, and there's a lot of things that needs to happen on the community level. But what we are trying to do is really to take the best technological solutions that are out there and operating. Let me give the example of what we're doing in Ontario, then it's more easy to understand. Biogas, to get the methane out of our own sewage and out of milk production, or the manure, is such an essential part in creating what we call the energy balance. You might have solar, you might have wind, but they are not there all the time. So in a fossil-free world, harvesting the methane is both really important for the climate, because it is it's 20 times more damaging than carbon, the CO2, the methane going into the air. So harvesting that already is a good thing. And then when you use it to produce power and heat, then you're replacing fossils. So it is a really important aspect of going green, but it is a technology. They have built 30 plants in Ontario and 27 are defunct today because they don't have the proper operating systems. They don't know exactly how to run it. So what Green Island is doing is that in Denmark, we have the global leading experts on running biogas plants. We have 275 of them, the highest concentration on Earth. So we have a lot of experience the last 40 years. And the best experts are working together with Green Island now with the farmers, the Dairy Farmers Association of Ontario, to build up this in the right way. And the right way from our point of view is that each farm or aggregated 4 or 5 farms get a smaller plant, and then they recirculate their manure, and the energy goes actually to San Francisco to run the buses in San Francisco. The biogas that comes out is sold to San Francisco to make the buses green. But what Green Island is bringing in is the expertise of how to build these. We are basically making available the blueprint how to run them, and then we come with the operating system, and then we can manage them through a very specialized IoT system. We can actually sit in Denmark and help them manage them and operating them optimal, and we can increase the yield from the manure to maybe more than double of what they have today. So basically, we're taking the deep knowledge of how to do these intricate processes and digitalizing them and making them available. So if a community in the States said, okay, let's start, we have next week, I'm meeting with a big community in Italy. They're flying up to see how they can do this. How can they harvest the methane from their community? But you know, Green Island is only 2.5, 3 years old. So my ambitions are, we don't run out of ambitions, that's for sure. But
Absolutely. One other thing I was curious about from your presentation was the idea of prosumers. Is that right? I haven't heard that term before, and I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
It's a new coined word. I like it because, you know, it's the producer and the consumer in one. It's because when I use words like cooperatives, or, you know, there's a lot of stigma involved. So sometimes it's important to bring in a word that people don't have history with. Like when Ravi and I worked in Russia, if we mentioned cooperative, we would be thrown out of the room. So prosumer is it's an EU. It's used a lot in laws and everything like that, and it's being pushed as the right way to go in the green transition. So I like the word. It's just consumers and producers in one word.
And that's basically meaning like the communities that are producing these resources.
The community are taking their own resources. They own the production facility that turns it into energy or into fertilizer or whatever. So they are, the circle is closed also on the ownership side. But you know, the problem for the communities, the challenge, not the problem, the challenge is that big companies have developed and, you know, are having much more knowledge, especially in the digital world. So communities have a hard time making available to themselves these kind of technologies. So we really want to disrupt this. Right now, 20% of the cost of building a biogas plant is to advisors on the blueprinting of it. And once we finish the first 2 plants in Canada, we're gonna make the blueprint available for free, because then we have recovered the cost of developing it, and then we can just make it available for communities. But we only make it available if it's consumer owned.
How does that work? Does someone have to sign an agreement saying like this is a consumer owned, you know,
we haven't worked out the
before?
intricacies of that, but you know, we know when we are dealing with the community, I hope. But the last cheater is not born yet. So, but anyway, I think, you know, we have to stick to our principles, and then we might be taken advantage of, but I hope not.
I have a question going back to something you said earlier about Green Island as a cooperative, and that everyone who participates in it becomes part of Green Island, and it's not the same model as with, you know, like if you're a corporation, you provide a service, they pay you, and then that's it. You made it sound as more like if you work with Green Island, and if there's a partnership that forms that kind of like lasts, and that once they go forward, they're part of the, you know, like you mentioned 2 things. One is that proutists are becoming full partners.
I understand your confusion, because I mentioned it's a process, and there's 2. Initially, we don't have 10,000 communities that have taken advantage of what we're offering yet. So we cannot pass the ownership to communities that we don't work with yet. So from Green Island being a more classical capitalist company in May this year till today, the first change has happened where the people who are today creating value, like Chris is one of the very important partner for us in Canada. He's a Proutist, and I have offered him now to become a partner in Green Island. It means ownership-wise also, and the core group that is working with it in Denmark have all joined now as co-owners. So that's the first step in the democratization of the ownership. And everybody that joins in as initial partners like that, they sign a commitment on a wealth cap, and they sign off on the intention of, as communities join in, makes use of our knowledge and our systems, they will be offered to become a co-owner of Green Island, so that eventually, I guess it's going to take 5-10 years, the communities will have the full ownership of Green Island.
That's such a radically different model from what like It's so strange to come from like an American mind view where it's like very profit driven to hear that. Like that's such an interesting way of running a company.
I have been through this summer. One of our partners, one of the tech guys, he thought we should go out and get some investment capital in building this platform. So he spent a lot of time, and I went to some meetings with these investors. After meeting with two of them, I just saw, it's like we do round one, then we do round two, then round three, and then we do an IPO. I mean, it's like their mind is, so at the end, I just had to say to Dan, his name is Dan, one of our partners, I just said, listen, Dan, I'm not going to go to any more of these meetings. I'm going to get the money to do this, because that mentality cannot work with our intent. So yeah, I'm very aware that this is different way of thinking, but we have to build the basic structures different if we're going to do anything real different and not just greenwash.
If I'm understanding correctly, you are currently, the model you're operating in is a worker-owned cooperation, and you're wanting to transition into a consumer-owned cooperation.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
But consumers aggregated in communities, because to have individual consumers is going to be too much. So, the community will be the member owner of Green Island going down the road.
What do you identify as a community? How large does it need to be? How do you define like what bounds, like where does that stop?
It's a very broad term that is being used in many ways, but we are defining it basically from a technical necessity. Just to give you a broad idea, we talk about neighborhoods. Certain technologies are economically advantageous on a neighborhood size. That might be a common heating system, that might be a few solar or something like that. But where it really kicks in is what we call a community, is somewhere between 1,000 and 4,000 households. That's where your biogas plants become profitable, or, not profitable is the wrong word, but becomes economically viable. And then, from there you go to the regional level, and then you go to the bioregional level. But the community level is like, we can bring it down to about 800 households. Then certain technologies are really making things life cheaper. Like, for example, if you talk about district heating, to do that on a neighborhood scale is relatively more expensive, quite more expensive than doing it for 800 or 1,000 households, because then you get the possibility to buy more technologies, and then you get this holistic synergy that makes it cheaper. So to define communities from a Green Island technical perspective, we would say minimum 800 households up to 4,000 or 5,000 households.
So this may be getting into the weeds of that a little bit. Maybe, maybe it's not worth getting into, but I'm curious, like how in a model where those communities are democratically making decisions for Green Island, how are each individual member of that community participating in that process? Seems like it would have to be like a democracy inside of a democracy in order to make that work.
It's a topic that we have spent a lot of time and a lot of thought on, because on one side we have it's needed to be able to be agile and make decisions, and at the same time you want to make sure that you're not just steamrolling a minority or something like that. So democracy, in the present understanding of democracy, is really not applicable, because you cannot say, okay, 60% voted to make a district heating system, so the last 40 you have to get it also. No, won't work. So basically what we have spent a lot of time in is translating the community. Like, we are not trying to replace democratic structures, political structures. We're just saying, to make utilities work, we are seeing the individual household in aggregation as the community, but our communication is twofold. We're basically presenting to individual households, okay, if you get a district heating, or you get a biogas plant or a sewage system that works this way, for your household, it's going to mean a down payment of $384, and it's going to cost you this much per month. and sign off here.
Mm.
And then, of course, all the documents, all the intricacies of this will be made available to everybody. But it's important that the decision that affects my household is made simple, because otherwise you can discuss forever and get nowhere. So we are basically going in and saying, you can trust, here is the big project, here is the investment, here's the loan we can give you, here's how it works. And then we look into finding basically at least 3-4 people in the community that can understand the economics of it, the technological side of it, the organization side of it, and the legal side of it. So we try to help the community build these capacities by engaging with key stakeholders in the community on different levels, so that there will be people in the community who understand the technology, and that there will be people who understand the legal implications and translate that into local understanding. Like this, we have done a lot of work, and we're working with 4 sort of archetypes, people that we're looking for in the community that can help translate our understanding into the community. So, and then each household will get an application where they can follow their bill and participate, and we will come with different suggestions. Okay, should you get a common electrical mobility solution for the whole community? Would that be something for your household, like this? So it becomes an easy decision for each household. Of course, in our calculations, we know, say there's a community with 1,200 households, and we know, okay, 800 of them have to sign up. Otherwise, it's not viable to make the solution. And then when 800 have signed up, then we go.
And you mentioned the legal aspects of it. I'm kind of curious. I don't know all the ins and outs of law in this area, or any area really, but something I was kind of curious about is, like, if there's conflict between established utility providers when you're coming in with these other solutions, especially in places where it is more profit driven and less cooperative run, if they're trying to like prevent this from moving forward because they're worried about losing a consumer base.
I mean, this is the biggest obstacle in realizing the Green Island dream. No question. The technology, the investments, the knowledge, you know, all of that can be solved. But there, you know, Sarkar said that revolution is to establish the right solution, but you'll be quite sure that you will get opposition when you do it right. So, and I'm not unused to that kind of situation, but I think it needs to be, we got to be a little bit opportunistic here and say, okay, where can it actually take place, you know, and we have to make a little dance around it and be agile. And we've experienced that in many of our projects, that we try to do one thing, then we found, oh no, they will never accept that, you know. So the answer to your question is yes, that is the biggest problem.
But I also could see a lot of potential in like how the more people are involved in something like this, the cost kind of goes down for everyone. It becomes more efficient for everyone. That seems inherently, at least to me, like it would kind of foster unity and community within people. Like if everyone's like, oh, well, this seems like a cool idea, I should try and get my neighbors on board so that we can all join in and work on this together and like lower the cost for everybody. Has that been your experience working on this project?
I am sure that we have reached in our transitional journey globally, we have reached the point where once these systems work, and they do work many places in Denmark, once they work, not only in Denmark, many places they work, Africa, here and there, they are going to simply replace the other structures, because even on a capitalistic pure profit logic, they will outcompete the fossil-driven and centrally owned systems, because there's, I give you a very concrete example. Denmark is the biggest country in the world on wind, windmills and financing wind all over the world. We have the biggest finance company, 2 of them actually, and Vestas is a big windmill producer. But right now, they have gone from community ownership, where the communities owned the windmills that were put up in the 80s and 90s, and by 2000, big capital went into windmills and they got really big and they went offshore, and now there's huge resistance. No more windmills are being putting up on land in Denmark because the communities are saying, no, why should we? So, I think if once the systems are working and people see what it does economically and to the environment, we will, and I think it's really important no longer to talk about the change. It is extremely important to stop the ideological, when I came to Eugene first time in 1986, it was a lot about advocacy and telling everybody that we should be going in a different direction, and a lot of discussions, idea development. But where we are now is stop all of that, because now we've decided to go somewhere else. Now the question is that we do it in the right way. So we have to get down and dirty and get it done. Mm-hmm. We don't need to discuss how anymore, because the right way of doing things is also the cheapest and the right. Yeah. So I think I make my point.
Can you talk a little bit more about the term greenwashing that you used?
The way I use the term is that Denmark is actually the best example of the greenwashed nation. Denmark is going out in the world and telling that we are so much ahead with the green transition. Denmark has the second largest footprint in the world per capita, just after the US, because we import so many consumer goods that are polluting in China and other places. And still, our prime minister likes to travel the world and tell that we are the greenest nation in the world. And it's so talking about green, but being black is greenwashing.
So, but Denmark does have, I think it's 52% of utilities are renewable energy. Is that correct?
I think, wind energy and solar has just passed 60% of the electricity in the grid. So yes, I mean, Denmark is ahead on a lot of these technologies, no doubt. Because on the footprint discussion, there's a big discussion going on right now here, because if you calculate the footprint done in Denmark, we are way down the scale. But when you add all the luxury goods that we import, we end up, because Denmark is a very affluent country, a lot of cars, a lot of mobile phones, a lot of consumption, and that has not been reduced. But in green transition, if you compare the mix, I think Denmark is probably the country in the world that is furthest down the line. The total consumption, how much of it in Denmark is actually green? Yes, we are doing quite well.
So do you think that the solution to the large footprint in Denmark is that people consume less? Or do you think that there are ways that people can close those loops and make those systems sustainable and continue to, enjoy their luxury goods?
I think it's both. I mean, there's no doubt that to circulate all resources, there are certain things that we consume today we will not be consuming tomorrow or next year. So that's a given for me. So reduction of general consumption of resources has to come down. But besides that, we also have to circularize all resources. When I moved here where I live, we had 1 bin. Now we have 14 bins. We have 14 different fractions, all our garbage. So it's moving, but there's a long way to go.
I have a different question on a topic that came up in the talk that you gave on Green Island, but I don't think we've hit on it yet today. And that is the idea of gamification in kind of like allowing people to envision a better community for themselves. You laid out a little bit of, the options that you were hoping to provide for people. Can you talk a little bit about like what you're envisioning and how people can actually learn about their own communities and like put things together and actually like envision it for themselves?
I just like to start with the motivation of this. the whole transition, because of the many of us who have been in advocacy for so many years, the discussion about the transition has turned complicated and has turned into a more of a political debate than focused on actually doing things. So one of the things that we are working on is a very simple way where you can go in on our web. We're testing the alpha right now, where you draw up on a map, this is my community, and then the community appears as your community, and then you can start putting in information. One of the big things that to make the transition is to make these advanced energy balance calculations. And to do those, you need information on what is the energy consumption in the community, what are the kind of waste streams that are there. You need actually quite in-depth knowledge in order to design the right systems. So our idea was to engage with young people in the community to gain XP by providing that information, by sort of populating their community with the information necessary, and then we would automate the energy balance calculation so that by their inputting info, we would know what the needs are, we would know what waste streams were there, and then you could drag and drop windmills, solar plants, biogas plants, all these things to match the needs and the waste streams. So you could make, in a very simple way, a utility design that might be 80–90% spot on. And once we see communities traveling down that road, doing some of the steps themselves, we would go in and push it the last 10–20%. And we would award those young guys or girls who did the work and become the vanguards of getting their community onto the transition. That was the ambition. Give me a year more, I think, before it works. But I think, the core understanding is here, the calculations behind the screen are very complicated, but that's why we have platforms that do that, right? So today, if you go and talk about a windmill, it's, you have to pay engineers hundreds of thousands to do advanced calculations, and how about permit? It's a nightmare of complications.
Is that something that you are, that Green Island is developing software for right now?
Basically, the software to do the energy balancing calculations is there. It's a university in Denmark have made that software, and they are ready to adapt that software to our platform because they also want to spread their what they have done. So basically, maybe we have many ambitions, but some of these things are quite intricate and quite complicated. So it's a matter of collaborating with different kind of providers to make it happen. And actually, while we've been talking to this software company, they have, for a commercial company in Germany, they have made a similar thing, not what we're trying to do. So it's not so far for them to make. And once it gets onto our platform, it'll be made free available, right? So that's the big thing for us.
Sorry, Tasha, did you have any other follow-ups on that?
No, I'm just so excited. Like, as soon as that's available, I'm like, oh, I want to see where's all the data, and then I want to be able to be like, what can we put in here to make this work? It's very exciting. I love that.
I'm very happy you say that. Now
I'm picturing Pokemon Go, but with local resources.
Yeah, we gotta make it a game.
Yeah.
My son, he said Minecraft.
Yeah, absolutely. It's some world building. It's kind of cool. And I think a lot of people in our generation have experience playing those games and enjoying those games. It's something I think about often when I'm playing Stardew Valley, that I could be this could be a game that could be adapted to build an actual world or teach real skills rather than just kind of simple combining of two elements and now you have a third, but how does that actually work? But I am curious to ask, I was told a little bit about this film Armstrap, And I'm wondering if you're open to talking about that story. I wasn't able to watch it, and I don't really know that much about it, but it sounds like a very fascinating story. So I'm interested in what that story is and what your involvement in it was.
You know, we touched on my young inspiration into the Prout ideas, and when I visited India in 81 and 82, when I visited Anandanagar or Purulia district, to actually see it being realized was life-changing experience. And the next 14 years I was very deeply involved in that project. I considered the people working there, the nurses, the teachers, the university professors, you know, all of them my brothers and sisters. And I would be there 2-3 times a year, and I would support the project in all kinds of ways. And I would bring people from Central America, from Russia, from Africa, to see it as an inspiration. And it really exemplified. Even I had a Danish TV station came in 1992, and made a documentary there about all the different things going on. So that is the one side of the coin. West Bengal at that time was a Stalinistic dictatorship, displacing hundreds of thousands of people, killing tens of thousands of people, their political opponents. Not just people from Prout, but from all kinds of walks of life. And once they learned the global impact of Anandanagar, they came down really hard on the project. We had to sneak in and out, and many people were arrested, tortured, killed in custody. Project was being attacked, people raped, schools burned down. It was very violent. And initially, I was not so involved in that side of things, but in the early 90s, I had been with the project for 12 years. And I got involved in trying to protect some of the outlying projects. You know, it's not like a compound with a very concentrated project. It's 40 square kilometers. It's a huge area. And schools and kindergartens, university, biogas plants, hydro plants, all this was, you know, scattered around and being attacked. So we helped fund a guard system of young Indians that would patrol in the night. And actually I got an American guy, ex-Navy SEAL, over to train these guys in they call it lathis. It's like a long stick. That's what they used to and then we got them some jeeps and everything like that. So that started in 92. And shortly afterwards, a agricultural expert who had come out of retirement, he was together with 4 guards who were butchered by the police that took off their uniforms, cut into pieces by the police. And that made a huge impact on me. I was there to collect the bodies, and this was just one out of 6-7 attacks I was close to. A nurse from Australia who had been a volunteer in the hospital for many years, her skull was opened by the police, and she was driven in the back of a van 14 hours to Calcutta and kept in custody. She almost died. Mother Teresa came to her rescue and got her out. So it had a profound impact on me. These two different things, you know, the excitement about the good things and then these tremendous atrocities. After the murder of Asimananda and 4 of the guards I had helped train, it was decided, not by me, but by members of the Indian Parliament and by local politicians, that our guards should be armed with hand weapons. because there was actually the Congress party in Delhi sanctioned this because they could not, the monopoly on power in India is with the states, not on a national level. So they could not intervene. So they agreed that we could come in with these weapons to arm the guards. And I flew back to Denmark and I made contact with a friend of mine who was in intelligence, and he contacted an ex-English intelligence officer, and the English intelligence contacted the Indian intelligence that had the sanction. So I helped finance and organize the buying of a plane and the necessary hand weapon. And the radars were turned off and we were to airdrop them into the area. The mission failed. We missed the target. The Russian crew thought we were talking in meters, but the English intelligence officer who was running that part of the operation were talking in feet. So the parachutes missed the target, but it created such an international stir in the media and everything like that. So no attack has ever happened since. So we sort of succeeded by failing. But the English intelligence officer, he got orders from England that he should let himself be captured and try to get me captured also. But I was escorted out of the country by the member of parliament who was my contact person. And I came back to Denmark immediately after that operation and cannot leave Denmark still now. So it is, the night when I had to get on the plane, I got really scared and I cried a lot. I made a decision that I had to do this, and I knew that it would change my life, and I would have to, it was like putting my life on the table, I call it. Like I have lived with the consequences ever since. There has been 2 trials in Denmark, and they've tried to extradite me to India a couple of times, which would be my certain death. So it is in 2000 and until 2002, the Danish government was protecting me because the Danish intelligence were protecting me here. But as the value-based politics, anti-immigration politics have taken over Denmark as well, as it has done many places in the world, in 2010, out of the blue, the government, it's a purely political case, they decided to extradite me to India. And I had to fight it in the courts. The courts said that they've never experienced such a political pressure to rule in a certain direction, but they stood their ground, which gave me a lot of respect for Denmark, but also a lot of disrespect for the politicians that are driven by these anti-human values, where I have a lot of immigrant friends from Syria and places, and they are facing these rhetorics and life-threatening extraditions all the time. So in a way, I also feel privileged that me as a white privileged guy is experiencing the same thing. Even there's been tremendous press coverage, obviously, in Denmark. I'm a very public person here because I fought the system and I won so far. Some people won't deal with me, but the people I work with and people who know me, of course, they like to work with me because they believe in my ideals. So it has become my threshold. Whenever I meet new people to work with, I have to tell them about this because I don't like it to come as a surprise. And that means some people won't work with me, but the people who will work with me are on the same values as I am. So in that way, it helps me actually. It's a factor in my life every day. And I obviously until in 2003, 2002, the justice minister said from the parliament speaker pulpit that I would never be extradited, that would be inhuman and all that. And a year later, my son was born, because now we thought everything was fine. But 7 years later, they tried to extradite me anyway. And of course, it's not easy for kids to have a father with this axe hanging over his head, but I feel still privileged. As food on the table every day, I have a warm place to live. I'm doing what I want to do. So the cost is there. You have to live with the threat of this. Even now, 26 years later, it is still a case, an open case.
Wow, thank you for sharing that story. I'm really curious about like that film in particular, how it, like, who made that, and did they approach you about it during the creation of that?
Denmark has a very strong documentary tradition. The guy who made it approached me, and obviously I could not get final cut. That's not how it works.
Sure.
But he followed me for a year and a half. Not every day, but we got to know each other. And I think what he made is true to what I believe and is true to the story. The Minister of Justice came out saying that it was my propaganda film, and the production company got really upset and sued him because it is not, I didn't make it. It is just a close to true story that they could make.
I'm just kind of curious of like something that big happening as a result of, you know, fighting for these values you believe in and trying to make this change, if that, like, what impact that had on how you approach fighting for change now. If it was like, well, I've already done this thing, so like what could go, and it went wrong in some ways, what could go wrong now, or if it's like I already kind of, if it was like this was such a big stressful thing, if that makes you like more hesitant to take larger risks or kind of motivates you because you've already done it, I guess.
I have a saying that, you know, doing Green Island, doing the projects that I do regularly, sometimes bring challenges, let's say that. but my go-to is always, but it's nowhere near an Armstrong, so get on with it, guys. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
There's a moment during the trial. I was married at the time. My wife left me during the trial because it was just too stressful, and she had to take care of herself, which I accept. And we are the best of friends and are co-parenting our kids. But at one point, I was being asked, like on every media, do you regret? Do you regret? Do you regret? And then one evening, I said, no, because I feel that was the last resort. What could I do otherwise, you know? I felt compelled to protect my brothers and sisters. And then one night we were sitting at this table actually, and she looked me in my eye and said, why don't you just say that you regret? Because politically it might have helped my court case, you know. And I just looked her back and I said, listen, if I say that, I'm finished. If I'm not true to my values and stand up for them, I cannot go through what I'm going through. And that's for me, that's sort of how it is to be me in this. That if we are not true to the ideals that we believe in and ready to sacrifice for them, we should just shut up and get don't go doing any Armstrong, please.
I'm inspired. Thank you so much, Niels.
It's been a very, very nice conversation. I'll take you up on the gamification thing. You'll become the testers.
Great. I'd love
Please
to
pass that on. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for talking with us. This has been like really fascinating and informative, and thank you so much for your time.
But thank you for taking time. This was also good for me. Yeah.